Welcome to today's episode of Ancient Journeys. Picture this. You're standing on a vast, windswept plain that stretches endlessly in every direction. The ground beneath your feet crunches with each step, not grass, but frozen earth mixed with ice crystals that glitter like diamonds in the pale Arctic sun. The temperature is a bone-chilling -40 degrees Celsius, and the wind cuts through you like a blade. This is no ordinary landscape. This is Beringia, a continent-sized land bridge that once connected Asia and North America, and you're witnessing one of the most remarkable journeys in human history. 25,000 years ago, your ancestors, people just like you, with the same hopes, fears, and determination, made an impossible choice. They left everything they knew behind and ventured into this frozen wasteland, carrying nothing but crude tools, animal skins, and an unbreakable will to survive. They couldn't have known they were about to become the first Americans, the founding mothers, and fathers of entire civilizations that would one day build cities, reach for the moon, and change the world forever. But how did they do it? How did these early humans, with no modern technology, no weather forecasts, and no rescue teams, manage to cross thousands of miles of the most hostile terrain on Earth? What drove them to leave the relative safety of Siberia and venture into the unknown? How did they survive temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in minutes? And perhaps most intriguingly, what secrets did they discover about survival that we're only just beginning to understand today? Today, we're going to uncover the extraordinary story of humanity's greatest migration, a tale of ingenuity, courage, an adaptation that makes every survival story you've ever heard pale in comparison. This is the story of how early humans crossed the frozen tundras and changed the course of human history forever. Chapter 1. The world before the crossing. The needle you hold in your hand today. That simple, pointed tool with an eye for thread would have been considered miraculous technology 25,000 years ago. In fact, it may have been the single most important invention that allowed our ancestors to survive their journey across the frozen world and become the first Americans. But to understand why, we need to step back in time and see the world as it existed before the Great Crossing began. The year is 30,000 BCE, and Earth is locked in the grip of the last glacial maximum. Imagine our planet as a giant freezer that someone has turned to its coldest setting. Massive ice sheets, some over 2 miles thick, cover vast portions of North America and Northern Europe. These aren't just seasonal snowfalls that will melt in spring. These are permanent glaciers that have grown and spread for thousands of years, locking up so much of the world's water that ocean levels have dropped by nearly 400 feet. In what we now call Siberia, small groups of Homo sapiens huddle around fires, their breath creating clouds in the frigid air. These aren't the stereotypical cavemen of popular imagination. These are people with brains identical to ours, capable of complex thought, language, and problem solving. They've already survived tens of thousands of years in harsh northern climates, developing technologies and strategies that would impress modern survival experts. Their world is dominated by what scientists call the Mammoth steppe, a cold, dry grassland ecosystem unlike anything that exists today. Picture the African savanna, but frozen. This vast landscape stretches from Spain in the west all the way to Alaska in the east, supporting enormous herds of woolly mammoths, ancient horses, giant bison, and cave lions. It's a landscape that seems alien to us now, but for these early humans, it was home. These Siberian peoples weren't living in isolation. Archaeological evidence suggests they had developed sophisticated social networks, sharing knowledge and resources across hundreds of miles. They had learned to read the migrations of animals with the precision of a modern meteorologist reading weather patterns. They knew which plants could sustain them through the harshest winters, how to preserve meat for months, and most crucially, how to make clothing that could keep them alive in temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in minutes. But something was driving them eastward. Climate data suggests that around 30,000 years ago, conditions in Siberia were becoming increasingly harsh. The massive ice sheets were growing, making summers shorter and winters more brutal. Game animals were becoming scarcer, and the competition for resources was intensifying. These early humans faced a choice that would define the future of our species: adapt to the worsening conditions or find new lands where they could thrive. Unknown to them, the same climatic forces that were making their lives difficult were also creating an opportunity. As more and more water became locked in ice sheets, sea levels continued to drop. Where once the Bering Strait separated Asia from North America, a new land was emerging from the waves. Beringia, a continental landmass larger than modern-day Australia. This wasn't the narrow land bridge of popular imagination. Beringia was a vast country in its own right, stretching over 1,000 miles from north to south and nearly 3,000 miles from east to west. It had its own climate, its own ecosystems, and its own unique challenges. The eastern shores of Siberia and the western coasts of Alaska were now connected by this massive expanse of newly emerged land, creating a highway between the continents for the first time in tens of thousands of years. But calling it a highway is misleading. This was no easy passage. Beringia was a harsh, unforgiving landscape of steppe tundra, characterized by bitter cold, fierce winds, and a growing season so short that only the hardiest plants could survive. The dominant vegetation was grasses, sedges, and low shrubs, enough to support large herbivores like mammoths and bison, but offering little shelter or easily accessible food for human travelers. The climate of Beringia was unlike anything these Siberian peoples had experienced. While Siberia was cold and dry, Beringia received more moisture from the North Pacific Ocean, creating a unique shrub tundra environment. Summer temperatures in Beringia were often 3 to 5 degrees Celsius colder than today, while winter temperatures could plummet to levels that would challenge even the most experienced Arctic survivors. Yet this land bridge also offered opportunities. The same animals that these hunters depended on in Siberia, mammoths, horses, bison, and caribou, were already beginning to move across this new landscape, following the expanding grasslands. Where the animals went, the hunters would follow. But making this journey would require everything these early humans had learned about survival and more. Archaeological evidence from sites across Siberia shows us that these pre-migration peoples were already master craftsmen and survivalists. They were creating sophisticated stone tools, including blades so sharp they could rival modern surgical instruments. They had learned to build semi-permanent shelters, using mammoth bones as framework and animal hides as covering. Most importantly, they had developed a technology that would prove crucial for their journey: the eyed needle. The invention of the needle around 40,000 years ago in Siberia represents one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. Before needles, humans could only make loose-fitting garments by draping animal hides around their bodies. These provided some protection, but were inadequate for the extreme conditions they were about to face. The needle changed everything, allowing them to create fitted, multi-layered clothing systems that could maintain body heat even in the most extreme conditions. As we prepare to follow these early humans on their epical journey, we must remember that they weren't setting out to discover a new continent. They were simply following the herds that sustained them, moving gradually eastward as conditions in their homeland became more challenging. They couldn't have known that their footsteps would carry them across a land bridge into an entirely uninhabited continent, making them the founding populations of countless future civilizations. Their story is about to become our story. The story of how human ingenuity, determination, and adaptability allowed our species to survive the worst climate conditions our planet has seen in the last 100,000 years and emerge stronger than ever. The frozen tundras ahead would test every survival skill they possessed, but they were about to prove that with the right knowledge, tools, and determination, humans could thrive anywhere on Earth. Chapter 2. The Great Freeze. You wake up to a world where the nearest ocean is hundreds of miles away, where the coastline you knew as a child is now dry land stretching beyond the horizon. This is the reality that confronted our ancestors 25,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, the deepest freeze Earth had experienced in over 100,000 years. To understand their incredible journey, we must first grasp the sheer scale of the climatic forces that both challenged and enabled their epic migration. The last glacial maximum wasn't just another cold snap. It was a complete transformation of our planet's geography and climate systems. Imagine if someone had drained the Mediterranean Sea, dropped the ocean levels by the height of a 40-story building, and then frozen vast portions of the northern hemisphere under ice sheets thicker than the Empire State Building is tall. That's the magnitude of change these early humans were living through. The Laurentide ice sheet alone, the massive glacier that covered much of what is now Canada and the northern United States, contained enough ice to lower global sea levels by nearly 400 feet. If you could have stood where New York City is today, you would have been looking up at a wall of ice stretching over a mile into the sky. Chicago, Detroit, and Seattle were buried under glaciers so thick that sunlight couldn't penetrate to the ground beneath. But it wasn't just the sheer volume of ice that made this period so challenging. It was the speed and unpredictability of climate change. Unlike the gradual warming we're experiencing today, Ice Age climate was characterized by rapid, dramatic swings that could transform entire ecosystems within decades or even years. Temperatures could drop by 10 degrees Celsius in a single generation, forcing every living thing to adapt quickly or perish. These climate swings weren't gentle transitions. Evidence from ice cores and sediment samples reveals that temperatures during the last glacial maximum could fluctuate wildly. A relatively mild period might be followed by centuries of brutal cold, then suddenly warm again for a few decades before plunging back into deep freeze conditions. For early humans trying to plan their survival strategies, this unpredictability was perhaps the greatest challenge of all. The atmospheric conditions during this period were unlike anything we've experienced in recorded history. With so much water locked up in ice, the air was significantly drier. Dust storms that would dwarf modern sandstorms regularly swept across the exposed continental shelves and ice-free lands. The jet stream patterns were completely different from today's, creating weather systems that could bring sudden, devastating temperature drops or unexpected warm spells that might melt crucial ice bridges. In Siberia, where our migrating ancestors lived, winter temperatures regularly dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius or lower. But it wasn't just the cold that challenged survival. It was the combination of extreme temperature, fierce winds, and limited daylight. During the depths of winter, some areas experienced polar night conditions for months at a time, with the sun barely rising above the horizon even at midday. Yet paradoxically, it was these same extreme conditions that created the land bridge our ancestors would use to reach the New World. As ice sheets locked up more and more water, the Bering Sea began to retreat, exposing the shallow seafloor that connected Asia and North America. This process wasn't sudden. It took thousands of years for Beringia to fully emerge, growing gradually as sea levels continued to drop. The climate of Beringia itself was a complex mixture of influences that created a unique ecosystem. Unlike the dry, continental climate of inland Siberia, Beringia received moisture from the North Pacific Ocean, which created a more humid environment despite the extreme cold. This moisture supported a distinctive shrub tundra vegetation that was more diverse than the grass steppes on either side. Temperature reconstructions show that Beringia experienced its own microclimate patterns. The northern regions, closer to the Arctic Ocean, were slightly warmer than today during some periods, while the southern areas remained consistently colder. This created a mosaic of different environmental zones across the land bridge, each with its own challenges and opportunities for survival. The vegetation of Ice Age Beringia was dominated by hardy grasses, sedges, and low-growing shrubs that could survive the short-growing seasons and permafrost conditions. Scattered patches of birch and willow trees created small refugia where larger animals could find shelter, but vast areas remained as open steppe tundra. This landscape supported enormous herds of megafauna, woolly mammoths, steppe bison, ancient horses, and caribou that our human ancestors depended upon for survival. The seasonal patterns in Ice Age Beringia were extreme by modern standards. Summers were brief but intense, with nearly 24-hour daylight causing rapid plant growth and abundant food for herbivores. However, these growing seasons lasted only 2 to 3 months in many areas. The rest of the year was dominated by harsh winter conditions with temperatures that could kill exposed humans within hours. Wind patterns across Beringia were particularly challenging for human survival. The exposed landscape offered little natural windbreak, and storms could bring combinations of extreme cold, driving snow, and winds exceeding hurricane force. These katabatic winds, flowing down from the ice sheets and across the tundra, created wind chill factors that made already dangerous temperatures absolutely lethal. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans developed sophisticated understanding of these climate patterns. They learned to read the subtle signs that predicted weather changes, understanding how cloud formations, wind directions, and animal behavior could forecast coming storms or temperature shifts. This knowledge wasn't just helpful. It was essential for survival in an environment where a wrong decision about when to travel or where to shelter could mean death for an entire group. The dust and loess deposits from this period tell us about the atmospheric conditions our ancestors breathed. The air was often filled with fine particles of rock and organic matter, ground up by glaciers and blown across continents by the powerful winds. This created a hazy, often reddish atmosphere that reduced visibility and created spectacular but ominous sunsets. Perhaps most remarkably, the climate data shows us that the conditions our ancestors faced were constantly changing. The land bridge they crossed wasn't a stable highway, but a dynamic landscape that was continuously being reshaped by advancing and retreating ice, changing sea levels, and evolving weather patterns. What might have been passable one year could become an impassable barrier the next. Understanding these climatic realities helps us appreciate the magnitude of what our ancestors accomplished. They didn't just survive in these conditions. They thrived well enough to maintain growing populations and develop new technologies. They read the landscape like a book, understood the rhythms of ice and wind and storm, and used this knowledge to make one of the most important journeys in human history. As we follow them across this transformed world, we must remember that every step they took was guided by hard-won understanding of climate patterns that took generations to learn. They were not just enduring the weather, they were mastering it using their knowledge of ice, age climate systems to navigate across a continent-sized land bridge and into a new world that would become their children's home for thousands of generations to come. Chapter 3. The Lost Continent. Standing at the edge of what is now the Chukchi Sea, you gaze out across endless waves, completely unaware that beneath these dark waters lies one of the most important landscapes in human history. This is where Beringia once stood, not the narrow land bridge of textbook illustrations, but a vast continent larger than Australia, a frozen world that served as humanity's pathway to the New World and home to some of the most remarkable ecosystems Earth has ever known. To truly understand Beringia, we must first abandon the misleading image of a simple bridge. When fully emerged during the last glacial maximum, Beringia stretched 1,600 kilometers from north to south and nearly 3,000 kilometers from east to west. This massive landmass extended from Russia's Verkhoyansk Mountains in the west to Canada's Mackenzie River in the east, encompassing what are now the Chukchi and Bering Seas, plus vast additional areas that are today submerged beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water. The landscape of Beringia was unlike anything that exists on Earth today. Imagine a rolling plain of tundra and grassland, broken by scattered low hills and crossed by meandering rivers that flowed toward distant, ice-locked seas. The dominant ecosystem was what paleontologists call Mammoth steppe, a unique plant community that could support enormous populations of large grazing animals, but has no modern equivalent anywhere on our planet. This mammoth steppe was characterized by highly productive grasslands dominated by hardy species like bluegrass, fescue, and sage, mixed with sedges and low-growing herbs that could survive the brief growing seasons and harsh winters. Unlike modern Arctic tundra, which is dominated by moss and lichen, Beringian vegetation was rich in nutritious grasses and forbs that could support massive herds of herbivores throughout the year. The climate of Beringia was a complex mixture of continental and maritime influences that created unique conditions across different regions of the landmass. The western areas, closer to Siberia, were cold and dry with extreme temperature variations. The central regions experienced a more moderate climate influenced by moisture from the surrounding seas, while the eastern areas near present-day Alaska showed patterns influenced by Pacific weather systems. Temperature data reconstructed from fossil evidence reveals that Beringia experienced significant regional variations. In some northern areas, average temperatures were actually 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than today, while southern regions remained 2 to 4 degrees colder than modern conditions. These temperature gradients created distinct ecological zones across the continent, each supporting different plant and animal communities. The seasonal patterns in Beringia were extreme and challenging. Summers brought nearly continuous daylight and rapid plant growth, but these growing seasons lasted only 2 to 4 months depending on latitude and local conditions. The rest of the year was dominated by long, dark winters with temperatures that regularly dropped to -30 or -40 degrees Celsius, accompanied by fierce winds that created lethal wind chill conditions. But it was the incredible diversity of wildlife that made Beringia truly remarkable. This lost continent supported the richest megafaunal community the world has ever known, with species that seem almost mythical today. Herds of woolly mammoths, some standing over 12 feet tall at the shoulder, roamed the grasslands alongside giant steppe bison twice the size of modern buffalo. Ancient horses, built for cold weather survival with thick coats and stocky frames, galloped across the plains in herds that may have numbered in the tens of thousands. The predators of Beringia were equally impressive. Cave lions to 25% larger than modern African lions, but adapted for cold climates, stalked the herds alongside massive, short-faced bears that stood over 11 feet tall on their hind legs. Packs of dire wolves, scimitar cats with saber-like canine teeth, and even the enormous Arctidus bears created a predator community that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Perhaps most remarkably, Beringia was home to unique species found nowhere else on Earth. The Beringian lion was a distinct subspecies adapted specifically for this environment, while specialized forms of mammoth, bison, and horse evolved to thrive in the continent's unique conditions. Some scientists believe that certain plant species also evolved exclusively in Beringia, creating endemic ecosystems that vanished forever when the landmass was submerged. The rivers of Beringia played crucial roles in shaping both the landscape and the lives of its inhabitants. These waterways, fed by snowmelt and seasonal precipitation, created corridors of slightly warmer and more sheltered conditions where different plant communities could flourish. River valleys often contained patches of willow and birch trees, creating small oases in the vast grassland environment and providing crucial resources for both animals and humans. For the early humans who ventured onto this continent, Beringia represented both unprecedented opportunities and extreme challenges. The abundant megafauna provided a potentially unlimited food source for skilled hunters, but the climate and terrain demanded survival techniques more sophisticated than anything humans had previously developed. The open landscape offered little natural shelter from storms or predators, requiring constant vigilance and careful planning for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that different regions of Beringia supported human populations at different times and in different ways. The eastern areas, with their slightly milder maritime-influenced climate, may have been more hospitable for sustained human habitation. The central regions, with their productive grasslands and abundant game, likely served as hunting grounds where groups could harvest large amounts of meat and other resources before retreating to more sheltered areas. The western edges of Beringia, closest to established Siberian populations, probably served as seasonal hunting territories where groups could venture out during favorable conditions to exploit the resources of this new landscape. These areas would have been the first to be explored and utilized, creating a gradual expansion pattern as human groups became more familiar with Beringian conditions. One of the most fascinating aspects of Beringia was its role as a biological mixing zone. Species that had been separated by the Bering Strait for millions of years suddenly found themselves sharing the same continent. Asian and North American plant and animal species intermingled, creating hybrid ecosystems that had never existed before and would never exist again once the landmass was submerged. The geological structure of Beringia was largely flat and low-lying, which is why it was the first land to emerge as sea levels dropped and the last to be submerged as they rose again. This topography created vast, unbroken expanses of habitat ideal for large migratory herds, but challenging for humans who needed shelter and varied resources for long-term survival. Scientific studies of modern seafloor sediments in the Bering and Chukchi seas have revealed preserved pollen, plant remains, and even frozen organic matter that provide direct evidence of Beringian ecosystems. These samples show us that this lost continent supported plant communities more diverse and productive than modern Arctic tundra, explaining how it could sustain such enormous populations of large mammals. Climate modeling studies suggest that Beringia experienced significant environmental changes throughout the period of human habitation. Earlier phases may have been relatively stable, allowing human populations to establish sustainable hunting and gathering patterns. Later phases, as the last glacial maximum intensified, likely became more challenging and may have driven the final push of human populations eastward into North America proper. As we stand today on the shores of Alaska or Siberia, looking out over the waves that now cover this lost continent, it's difficult to imagine the vast grasslands, the thundering herds, and the small groups of humans who lived, hunted, and raised their children on this remarkable landscape. But beneath those waters lies the foundation of American civilization, the continent-sized stepping stone that allowed our ancestors to cross between worlds and begin the human story in the New World. Chapter 4. The Needle Revolution. In your hands lies what might be the most important tool in human history. Not a computer chip or a steam engine, but something so simple you use it without thinking: a needle. That slender piece of metal with an eye for thread represents a technological revolution that may have made the difference between extinction and survival for our Ice Age ancestors. Without the needle, humans might never have been able to cross the frozen tundras of Beringia and reach the Americas. This is the story of how a tiny tool changed the course of human evolution and opened up entire continents for habitation. Before the invention of the needle, around 40,000 years ago, humans had survived cold climates for tens of thousands of years, but their clothing was primitive by the standards of what was to come. Early humans draped themselves in loose-fitting animal hides that provided some protection from the elements, but were far from adequate for the extreme conditions of the Ice Age. These garments were essentially large, unwieldy cloaks that served multiple purposes: sleeping bags at night, baby carriers during travel, and hand protection while working with stone tools. Archaeological evidence from sites across Eurasia shows us exactly what life was like before the needle revolution. Stone scrapers with distinctive wear patterns reveal how our ancestors processed animal hides, while bone awls, pointed tools used for punching holes in leather, show their attempts to join pieces of hide together. But these early garments had major limitations. They were loose-fitting, allowing cold air to circulate freely around the body. They were difficult to secure, meaning they could come off at crucial moments. Most importantly, they provided poor protection against wind, which could be deadly in Ice Age conditions. The breakthrough came when some unknown genius, probably a woman, given the traditional association between women and textile work in hunter-gatherer societies, realized that a thin, sharp tool with a hole in one end could revolutionize clothing construction. The first needles were carved from the long bones of birds and small mammals, shaped with stone tools and polished smooth. These early needles were remarkably sophisticated, with eyes so small and precisely formed that they rival modern needles in their engineering. But creating these tools required extraordinary skill and patience. Archaeological experiments show that making a single bone needle could take an entire day of careful work. The bone had to be selected for the right combination of hardness and flexibility. Too hard, and it would shatter during shaping. Too soft, and it would break during use. The craftsperson had to use progressively finer stone tools to shape the needle, then carefully drill or burn the eye without cracking the delicate shaft. The impact of the needle on human survival cannot be overstated. For the first time in human history, people could create fitted, tailored clothing that formed a close-fitting barrier against the elements. These new garments could be made in multiple layers, creating an insulation system that trapped warm air next to the body while keeping cold air out. The difference between loose-draped hides and tailored clothing was literally the difference between life and death in extreme cold conditions. Archaeological evidence from late Ice Age sites reveals the sophisticated clothing systems that needles made possible. Analysis of tool wear patterns preserves sinew and thread fragments, and comparison with historically documented Arctic clothing suggests that Ice Age humans developed remarkably advanced cold weather gear. They created multi-layer systems with soft, fur-lined undergarments next to the skin, middle layers for insulation, and outer shells for wind and moisture protection. The materials available to Ice Age needleworkers were diverse and carefully selected for specific purposes. Thread was made from sinew, the tough connective tissue from large animals like mammoths and bison, which was incredibly strong and durable. Plant fibers from nettle, flax, and other sources provided different thread types for different purposes. Even human hair was sometimes used for delicate work or decorative elements. The fur and hide selection for Ice Age clothing shows remarkable sophistication in understanding material properties. Arctic fox fur, with its incredible insulation properties, was prized for inner garments and hood trim. Caribou hide, with its unique hollow hair structure, provided excellent insulation while remaining relatively lightweight. Mammoth hide, thick and nearly waterproof, served as outer shells for the most extreme conditions. Even bird feathers were incorporated into garments, providing additional insulation and decoration. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed just how advanced Ice Age needle technology became. At sites like La Prele in Wyoming, archaeologists have found bone needles so small and delicate they rival modern surgical needles in their precision. These tools were made from the leg bones of small animals like foxes, rabbits, and even cats, bones that were naturally the right size and shape for needle construction, but required exceptional skill to work with. The social implications of needle technology were as important as the practical ones. Creating sophisticated clothing required not just individual skill, but community cooperation and knowledge sharing. The best needleworkers would have been highly valued members of their groups, and the knowledge of clothing construction would have been carefully passed from generation to generation through hands-on teaching and practice. Evidence suggests that Ice Age clothing was not just functional, but also decorative and socially significant. Beads made from animal bones, teeth, and even amber have been found at archaeological sites, indicating that these early humans took time and care to make their clothing beautiful as well as practical. This attention to aesthetics in the midst of survival challenges shows the fundamental human drive to create art and express identity even under the most difficult conditions. The needle revolution also enabled innovations beyond basic clothing. Shelters could be constructed more effectively using sewn hides, creating weatherproof structures that provided crucial protection from storms. Containers, bags, and other portable goods could be created with precision stitching that made them more durable and effective. Even weapons could be improved. Arrows could be fletched more precisely, and protective gear like quivers could be crafted with careful attention to functionality. Experimental archaeology has shown us just how effective Ice Age clothing technology could be. Researchers wearing replicas of Ice Age garments have survived comfortably in temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius, demonstrating that these ancient technologies were not just adequate, but highly sophisticated solutions to extreme environmental challenges. The clothing systems developed by needle-using Ice Age peoples were often superior to early European Arctic gear and comparable to modern cold-weather equipment in their effectiveness. The spread of needle technology across Eurasia can be tracked through archaeological remains, revealing how this innovation diffused through human populations and enabled expansion into previously uninhabitable territories. The earliest needles appear in Siberia and Central Asia around 40,000 years ago, then spread both westward into Europe and eastward toward Beringia. The presence of sophisticated needles at the oldest human sites in the Americas suggests that this technology was already well developed by the time humans crossed into the New World. Climate data shows that the period of needle invention coincided with some of the harshest conditions of the last Ice Age, suggesting that environmental pressure drove this technological innovation. As temperatures dropped and winter conditions became more extreme, the survival advantages of tailored clothing became overwhelming, driving rapid development and adoption of needle-based textile technologies. The needle revolution represents one of the clearest examples of how human technological innovation allowed our species to expand into new environments and survive conditions that would have been impossible otherwise. Without needles, humans could never have survived the crossing of Beringia during the last glacial maximum. The Americas might have remained uninhabited for thousands of years longer, and the entire course of human history would have been different. Today, as we zip up our high-tech parkas and marvel at modern synthetic fabrics, it is worth remembering that the basic principles of cold-weather clothing were worked out by our Ice Age ancestors with nothing but bone needles, animal sinew, and carefully selected furs and hides. Their innovations in textile technology represent one of humanity's greatest technological achievements, a revolution that opened up entire continents and changed the course of human civilization forever. Chapter 5. Reading the Ice. You stand on a featureless expanse of white, stretching endlessly in every direction. No roads, no landmarks, no GPS, just you, the bitter wind, and the landscape that looks identical whether you face north, south, east, or west. For modern humans, this would be a death sentence. For our Ice Age ancestors crossing Beringia, this was simply Tuesday. They had developed navigation and weather prediction skills so sophisticated that they make modern meteorologists look like amateurs. This is the story of how early humans learned to read the subtle language of ice, wind, and sky to find their way across a continent and stay alive in conditions that would challenge our most advanced technology. The challenge of navigation in Ice Age Beringia was unlike anything humans had faced before. The landscape was relatively flat and uniform, lacking the mountain ranges, distinctive rock formations, or major river systems that had served as landmarks in other regions. During winter months, snow cover eliminated even subtle terrain features, creating a white wasteland where direction could become completely lost within minutes of leaving camp. But our ancestors developed a sophisticated understanding of natural navigation cues that allowed them to maintain their direction across hundreds of miles of seemingly featureless terrain. They learned to read the subtle variations in snow texture that reveal prevailing wind directions. They noticed how ice formations differed on the north and south sides of any slight elevation. Most importantly, they developed an intimate knowledge of celestial navigation that allowed them to use the sun, moon, and stars as reliable compass points even in polar conditions. The sun provided the most reliable navigation reference, but using it effectively in polar regions required detailed knowledge of seasonal and daily variations. During summer months, the sun would trace a complete circle around the sky without setting, making traditional east-west orientation challenging. Our ancestors learned to use the sun's elevation rather than its position to determine true north-south orientation. They understood that the sun would be highest when pointing south, and they could use shadows from small objects to maintain consistent direction throughout the day. Winter navigation was even more challenging, with the sun barely rising above the horizon for short periods each day. But Ice Age peoples developed techniques for using even minimal sunlight effectively. They learned to recognize the subtle differences in light color and intensity that revealed the sun's position even when it was hidden by clouds. They could identify true south by observing which direction showed the brightest sky during the brief daylight hours. Star navigation in the Arctic required knowledge that went far beyond simple constellation recognition. Our ancestors had to understand how the apparent motion of stars changed with latitude, how atmospheric conditions affected star visibility, and how to use multiple celestial objects to confirm direction when individual stars might be obscured by weather. They developed sophisticated techniques for using the North Star and other circumpolar constellations that remain visible throughout the night in northern latitudes. But perhaps their most remarkable skill was weather prediction, the ability to read subtle atmospheric cues and animal behavior to forecast dangerous conditions hours or even days in advance. In an environment where a sudden storm could mean death, this knowledge was quite literally a matter of survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age peoples understood weather patterns with a precision that rivals modern meteorological science. They learned to read cloud formations with extraordinary subtlety. Different types of clouds indicated different weather systems approaching, and the high color and movement of clouds could predict not just whether a storm was coming, but what kind of storm it would be, how severe it would become, and how long it would last. They could distinguish between clouds that meant snow, clouds that meant dangerous wind, and clouds that indicated temperature changes. Wind patterns provided another crucial source of weather information. Our ancestors understood that wind direction changes often preceded major weather systems by many hours. They could feel subtle changes in air pressure through changes in wind behavior and intensity. They learned that certain combinations of wind direction and temperature predicted specific types of dangerous weather that required immediate preparation or shelter seeking. The behavior of animals provided some of the most reliable weather prediction information available to Ice Age peoples. Migrating birds often altered their flight patterns hours before storms that were invisible to human senses. Mammals would change their feeding and resting behaviors in response to approaching weather systems. Even insects provided valuable information. The activity levels and movement patterns of beetles, flies, and other small creatures could indicate atmospheric pressure changes that preceded major weather events. Archaeological evidence reveals that Ice Age peoples developed sophisticated systems for sharing and preserving weather knowledge across generations. They created oral traditions that encoded crucial survival information in memorable stories and songs. They developed symbolic systems for communicating weather information across distances, using smoke signals, rock cairns, and other markers to warn distant groups about dangerous conditions. The ability to predict ice conditions was perhaps the most crucial survival skill for crossing Beringia. Ice could provide safe passage across rivers and coastal areas, but it could also create deadly traps for unwary travelers. Our ancestors learned to assess ice safety through sound, appearance, and behavior. They could tell the difference between solid ice that would support human weight and thin ice that would collapse without warning. They developed techniques for testing ice safety that minimize risk while providing reliable information. They learned to read the color variations in ice that indicated thickness and strength. They understood how wind, current, and temperature changes affected ice formation and stability. Most importantly, they developed group protocols for ice travel that distributed weight and provided emergency response procedures when ice conditions became dangerous. Navigation in whiteout conditions, when blowing snow eliminated all visibility, required techniques that seem almost supernatural to modern observers. Our ancestors learned to navigate by sound, using the acoustic properties of the landscape to maintain direction. They could identify the direction of distant water by the subtle sound differences in wind patterns. They could navigate by the feel of wind direction on exposed skin, using their understanding of prevailing weather patterns to maintain course, even when they couldn't see beyond arm's length. The development of landmark systems in seemingly featureless terrain shows remarkable ingenuity and environmental awareness. Ice Age peoples learned to create and recognize subtle landmarks that would be invisible to casual observers, but could provide crucial navigation references. They would arrange stones in specific patterns, create deliberate modifications to natural features, and establish supply caches that served as both resources and navigation points. Their understanding of seasonal patterns was encyclopedic in its depth and precision. They knew exactly when different weather systems typically occurred throughout the year, allowing them to plan long-distance travel during the most favorable conditions. They understood the complex interactions between temperature, precipitation, and wind that created the brief windows of opportunity for safe travel across dangerous terrain. The knowledge of ice formation patterns allowed them to predict and utilize natural bridges and passages that would form seasonally across rivers and coastal areas. They understood that certain combinations of temperature and wind would create solid ice corridors that could support travel, while other conditions would create dangerous, unstable ice that should be avoided at all costs. Modern meteorologists with access to satellite data, computer models, and global weather monitoring systems are often amazed by the accuracy of weather prediction methods used by indigenous Arctic peoples who learned their skills from traditions passed down from Ice Age ancestors. These traditional forecasting methods often outperform modern technology for local, short-term weather prediction because they're based on thousands of years of accumulated observation and experience. The social aspects of navigation and weather prediction were as important as the technical skills. Information had to be shared effectively among group members, with clear communication about weather conditions, navigation landmarks, and route planning. Leadership roles often went to individuals who demonstrated superior skills in reading environmental conditions and making crucial decisions about travel timing and route selection. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age peoples developed standardized systems for measuring and communicating distance and direction. They created units of measurement based on walking time under different conditions, allowing them to plan journeys with remarkable precision. They developed techniques for estimating travel time that took into account terrain, weather, and seasonal conditions. Integration of navigation and weather prediction skills created a comprehensive environmental awareness system that allowed small groups of humans to survive and thrive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. These skills weren't just individual talents, but community knowledge systems that required constant practice, refinement, and transmission to younger generations. As our ancestors prepared to leave the known landmarks of Siberia and venture onto the vast expanse of Beringia, they carried with them not just physical tools and supplies, but an invisible arsenal of environmental knowledge that was every bit as important for their survival. Their ability to read the subtle language of ice, wind, and sky would guide them across a continent and into a new world, where these same skills would continue to serve their descendants for thousands of generations to come. Chapter 6. The Mammoth Hunters. Picture yourself standing before a creature that towers 12 feet above you, weighs as much as 4 elephants, and is covered in thick, shaggy hair designed to withstand temperatures that would kill you in minutes. Its curved tusks are longer than your entire body, and its trunk could crush your skull with a casual swipe. This is your dinner. For our Ice Age ancestors crossing Beringia, hunting woolly mammoths and other megafauna wasn't just about getting food. It was about accessing the raw materials that made survival possible in the world's most hostile environment. This is the story of how small groups of humans developed strategies sophisticated enough to take down the largest land animals on Earth and turn every part of their massive bodies into tools for survival. The woolly mammoth was perfectly adapted for Ice Age conditions, which made it both an ideal target and an incredibly dangerous adversary for human hunters. Standing up to 12 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing up to 8 tons, these massive creatures were living warehouses of everything our ancestors needed: meat for food, fat for fuel and waterproofing, hide for shelter and clothing, bones for tools and construction, and hair for insulation and cordage. A single mammoth could provide enough resources to sustain a group of 20 to 30 people for months. But bringing down such a massive creature required hunting strategies that went far beyond simply throwing spears at large animals. Archaeological evidence reveals that Ice Age mammoth hunters developed sophisticated techniques that combine detailed knowledge of animal behavior, coordinated group tactics, specialized weapons technology, and careful planning that could take weeks or even months to execute successfully. The first challenge was simply finding mammoths in the vast expanses of Beringia. These animals lived in herds that could number in the hundreds, but they were constantly moving across territories that spanned hundreds of square miles. Our ancestors became expert trackers, learning to read the subtle signs that revealed mammoth presence and movement patterns. Fresh tracks in snow or mud could tell them not just that mammoths had passed, but how many animals were in the group, their general health and age, and which direction they were traveling. Mammoth dung provided crucial information about herd health and diet, helping hunters predict where the animals might move next. Broken branches and stripped vegetation showed feeding patterns and could indicate whether a herd was moving quickly through an area or settling in for extended grazing. Even the scent carried on the wind could alert experienced hunters to mammoth presence from distances of several miles. But simply finding mammoths was only the beginning. These animals were incredibly dangerous when threatened, capable of trampling or goring hunters with their massive tusks. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age peoples developed hunting techniques that minimized direct confrontation while maximizing their chances of success. One of the most effective methods was the construction of hunting traps and drive systems that used the landscape itself as a weapon. Archaeological sites across Eurasia reveal evidence of sophisticated mammoth trap systems. Hunters would identify natural landscape features like valleys, ravines, or cliff edges that could be used to constrain mammoth movement. They would then construct funnel-shaped drive lanes using piled stones, wooden posts, or even snow walls to channel the animals toward these natural traps. The construction of these drive systems required enormous amounts of coordinated labor and careful planning. The actual hunt required precise timing and coordination among dozens of hunters working in carefully choreographed roles. Some hunters would position themselves along the drive lanes to keep the animals moving in the right direction. Others would create noise and disturbance to start the herd moving toward the trap. Still others would wait at the trap site with specialized weapons designed to kill or disable the animals once they were constrained. The weapons used for mammoth hunting were marvels of Ice Age engineering. Spear points were carefully crafted from high-quality stone using techniques that created razor-sharp edges, capable of penetrating thick mammoth hide. These points were hafted onto sturdy wooden shafts using complex binding systems that could withstand the enormous forces generated when striking such massive animals. Some spear systems were designed to detach from their shafts after penetration, leaving the point inside the animal while preventing the shaft from being lost or broken. Archaeological experiments have shown that these Ice Age spear points were incredibly effective weapons. Modern replicas can penetrate several inches into simulated mammoth hide and muscle, delivering lethal wounds that would cause massive bleeding and eventual death. However, a wounded mammoth could remain dangerous for hours or even days, requiring hunters to track and finish off injured animals while staying safe from their desperate counterattacks. Fire played a crucial role in mammoth hunting strategies. Hunters learned to use controlled burns to modify the landscape, creating cleared areas where mammoth movement could be predicted and controlled. They could start grass fires that would drive herds toward trap sites, or create fire barriers that prevented animals from escaping in certain directions. The smell and sound of fire also had psychological effects on the animals, often causing panic that made them easier to drive into traps. The processing of a mammoth carcass was as complex and important as the hunt itself. These enormous animals had to be butchered quickly and efficiently before the meat spoiled or was claimed by predators. Archaeological evidence shows that Ice Age peoples developed systematic butchering techniques that could completely process a mammoth carcass within days of the kill. Different group members had specialized roles in this process, with expert butchers directing the work and ensuring that every useful part of the animal was preserved. Meat preservation was crucial for maximizing the value of a mammoth kill. Ice Age peoples developed sophisticated techniques for smoking, drying, and freezing meat that could preserve it for months. They learned to identify which cuts of meat were best for immediate consumption, which could be dried for long-term storage, and which should be processed into pemmican, a high-energy food combining dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries that could sustain travelers for extended periods. The bones of mammoths provided raw materials for an incredible variety of tools and construction projects. Mammoth shoulder blades could be shaped into shovels for digging or construction work. Long bones could be split and worked into spear shafts, tent poles, or structural elements for shelters. Even small bones were valuable, serving as needles, awls, or decorative elements for clothing and equipment. Mammoth tusks were perhaps the most valuable single resource that could be obtained from these animals. The ivory was ideal for carving into tools, weapons, and art objects that were both functional and beautiful. Tusk ivory could be worked into spear points, knife handles, and even complex mechanical devices like spear throwers that increased hunting effectiveness. The curved shape of mammoth tusks made them perfect raw materials for constructing the framework of dome-shaped shelters that could withstand extreme weather conditions. The fat from mammoths was crucial for survival in Ice Age conditions. This high-energy food source provided the calories needed to maintain body heat in extreme cold conditions. Mammoth fat could also be used for waterproofing clothing and equipment, as fuel for lamps that provided light during the long polar nights, and as a base for making adhesives and preservatives. The social organization required for successful mammoth hunting created some of the most complex cooperative systems in human history up to that point. Successful hunts required coordination among dozens of people playing different specialized roles over extended periods of time. This level of cooperation required sophisticated communication systems, leadership structures, and methods for sharing the enormous resources that successful hunts provided. Archaeological evidence suggests that mammoth hunting created social bonds that extended far beyond individual hunting groups. Successful hunts produced more resources than a single group could use, leading to sharing networks that connected communities across vast distances. These sharing relationships created alliances and mutual support systems that were crucial for survival in the harsh conditions of Ice Age Beringia. The knowledge required for successful mammoth hunting was encyclopedic in its scope and had to be passed down through generations of careful teaching and practice. Young hunters had to learn animal behavior, weapon construction, hunting tactics, butchering techniques, and preservation methods that represented thousands of years of accumulated human experience. This knowledge transmission was one of the most important functions of Ice Age social systems. Modern archaeologists studying mammoth kill sites are amazed by the efficiency and completeness of Ice Age butchering techniques. These ancient hunters wasted virtually nothing from their kills, finding uses for every bone, every scrap of hide, and every organ. Their processing techniques were so thorough that modern forensic archaeologists sometimes struggle to identify what parts of the animal were used for which purposes. The success of mammoth hunting strategies allowed human populations to not just survive, but thrive in Ice Age conditions. The abundant resources provided by these massive animals supported larger human groups, enabled technological innovation, and provided the surplus resources necessary for long-distance travel and exploration. Without the ability to successfully hunt mammoths and other megafauna, humans might never have been able to cross Beringia and reach the Americas. As we follow our ancestors across the frozen landscapes of Beringia, we must remember that they weren't just surviving. They were thriving by mastering one of the most challenging hunting tasks ever attempted by humans. Their success in bringing down these massive creatures represents one of humanity's greatest achievements in environmental adaptation and cooperative behavior, setting the stage for the conquest of an entire new continent. Chapter 7. Shelters of Bone and Hide. You recrouched inside what might be humanity's most ingenious architectural achievement, a dwelling that could be assembled in hours, withstand hurricane-force winds, and keep you warm in temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. The walls around you are made from mammoth bones, the roof from carefully sewn hides, and the whole structure is designed using engineering principles that wouldn't look out of place in a modern textbook. This is Ice Age architecture at its finest, and it represents one of the most crucial adaptations that allowed our ancestors to survive their crossing of Beringia and establish permanent human presence in the Arctic regions of the New World. The challenge of creating adequate shelter in Ice Age conditions was unlike anything humans had faced before. Traditional rock shelters and caves, which had served human populations well in more temperate regions, were rare or non-existent across much of Beringia. The landscape was largely flat and exposed, offering little natural protection from the fierce winds and extreme temperatures that characterized this environment. Our ancestors had to become architects and engineers, designing and building structures that could provide reliable protection using only the materials available. In their harsh environment, the breakthrough came with the realization that the bones of the massive animals they hunted could serve as construction materials. Mammoth bones, in particular, were ideal for this purpose. They were incredibly strong, naturally shaped for construction use, and available in large quantities from successful hunts. A single mammoth skeleton could provide the structural framework for multiple dwellings, and bones from several animals could support truly impressive architectural achievements. Archaeological excavations at Ice Age sites across Eurasia have revealed the sophistication of bone and hide architecture. The most famous examples come from sites like Prehistoric in Ukraine, where archaeologists have uncovered the remains of mammoth bone houses that were occupied for extended periods during the last glacial maximum. These structures demonstrate engineering principles and construction techniques that show remarkable understanding of structural mechanics and environmental design. The basic design of Ice Age shelters was surprisingly standardized across vast geographic regions, suggesting that successful architectural principles were shared among human groups and passed down through generations. The typical structure was dome-shaped or conical, designed to shed wind and snow while providing maximum interior space with minimum surface area exposed to the elements. This shape is aerodynamically efficient, reducing wind resistance and preventing the accumulation of snow that could collapse the structure. The foundation of these shelters was typically created by arranging mammoth skulls in a circle, with the eye sockets facing inward to provide anchor points for other structural elements. These massive skulls, weighing several hundred pounds each, provided a stable base that could resist the tremendous forces generated by Arctic winds. The circular arrangement also created an efficient use of space, while providing structural integrity that could withstand various types of stress. The walls were constructed using mammoth long bones, femurs, tibias, and ribs that were carefully arranged and interlocked to create a strong, stable framework. These bones were often modified by shaping, cutting, or drilling to create better connections and more efficient structural systems. The builders showed remarkable ingenuity in using the natural curves and angles of mammoth bones to create complex, three-dimensional frameworks that were both strong and aesthetically pleasing. The most challenging aspect of construction was creating the roof system. This required connecting the wall framework to a central peak or dome structure that could support the weight of hide coverings and resist wind loads. Archaeological evidence suggests that builders used various techniques for roof construction, including carefully shaped mammoth ribs as rafters, tusks as curved support beams, and complex lashing systems that held everything together without using any metal fasteners. The covering system was as sophisticated as the bone framework underneath. Multiple layers of carefully prepared hides were sewn together to create weatherproof shells that could keep out wind, snow, and moisture while allowing some ventilation to prevent dangerous carbon dioxide buildup from fires inside the shelter. These hide coverings were often designed with overlapping sections that could be adjusted for different weather conditions, and removable panels that allowed for ventilation during milder periods. The interior design of Ice Age shelters shows remarkable attention to efficiency and comfort under extreme conditions. Floors were often lined with layers of mammoth hide and fur to provide insulation from the frozen ground. Sleeping areas were typically elevated slightly and arranged around the perimeter of the structure, with a central hearth area for cooking and warmth. Storage areas were built into the wall structure, using natural cavities in the bone framework to keep food, tools, and other supplies organized and accessible. Heating systems were crucial for survival and required careful engineering to work effectively in these structures. Central hearths were designed with stone linings that could withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles. Ventilation systems had to provide enough airflow to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning while minimizing heat loss. Some shelters included complex chimney systems built from stacked bones or stones that could channel smoke out of the structure while preventing wind from blowing down into the fire. The construction process itself required remarkable cooperation and coordination among group members. Building a mammoth bone shelter was a major undertaking that could take several days or even weeks to complete properly. Different individuals had specialized roles in the construction process, from selecting and preparing bones to designing the hide covering systems. The knowledge required for successful construction had to be passed down through Generations of careful teaching and hands-on experience. Archaeological evidence reveals that some Ice Age shelters were used repeatedly over many seasons, with repairs and modifications made as needed. This suggests that certain locations were particularly favorable for human habitation, and that successful shelter designs were refined and improved over time. Some sites show evidence of multiple construction phases, indicating that shelters were expanded or rebuilt as group sizes changed or as building techniques improved. The durability of these structures is demonstrated by their archaeological preservation. Mammoth bones used in shelter construction have survived for tens of thousands of years, allowing modern archaeologists to reconstruct the original buildings with remarkable accuracy. This preservation has provided crucial insights into Ice Age building techniques and has shown that these structures were far more sophisticated than early archaeologists had imagined. Climate considerations were integrated into every aspect of shelter design. The dome or conical shape shed wind and snow efficiently, while the bone framework provided excellent structural integrity in high winds. The hide covering systems were designed to expand and contract with temperature changes without losing their weatherproofing properties. Interior heating systems were positioned to provide maximum warmth with minimum fuel consumption, crucial in an environment where fuel sources were limited. The social aspects of shelter construction and use were as important as the technical considerations. These structures had to accommodate group living arrangements, provide privacy for families, and serve as centers for various activities including food preparation, tool making, and social gatherings. The interior layouts show evidence of careful planning to accommodate all these functions while maintaining efficient heating and ventilation. Regional variations in shelter construction reveal how Ice Age peoples adapted basic design principles to local conditions and available materials. In areas where mammoth bones were scarce, builders used other large animal bones or even constructed frameworks from wood and stone. In coastal areas, whale bones sometimes served similar structural functions. These regional adaptations show the flexibility and ingenuity of Ice Age architects. The tools required for shelter construction were specialized and sophisticated. Stone cutting tools were needed to modify bones for construction use. Drilling and boring tools were required to create connection points and ventilation systems. Measuring and planning tools helped ensure that structures were properly proportioned and aligned. The development of these construction tools represents a significant technological achievement in itself. Modern engineering analysis of Ice Age shelter designs reveals principles that are still used in contemporary Arctic architecture. The structural efficiency, environmental adaptation, and resource utilization demonstrated by these ancient buildings have influenced modern approaches to extreme climate construction. Some contemporary Arctic shelters use design principles that were first developed by our Ice Age ancestors. The psychological importance of adequate shelter cannot be underestimated in survival situations. These structures provided not just physical protection, but also psychological security that allowed human groups to maintain morale and social cohesion during the most challenging conditions. The ability to create warm, secure living spaces was crucial for the mental health and group stability that enabled long-term survival in Ice Age conditions. As our ancestors prepared to cross the vast expanses of Beringia, they carried with them the knowledge and skills needed to create adequate shelter using whatever materials they might find. This architectural expertise was as important as any weapon or tool they possessed, providing the foundation for human survival in the Arctic and enabling the successful colonization of environments that had never before supported human populations. The legacy of Ice Age architecture extends far beyond the immediate survival needs of our ancestors. These ancient building techniques represent humanity's first serious attempt to modify and control the environment through constructed shelter, laying the groundwork for all subsequent architectural achievements and demonstrating the innovative capacity that would eventually allow humans to build cities, monuments, and structures that reach toward the sky. Chapter 8. Following the herds, you stand motionless in the pre-dawn darkness, every sense straining to detect the first signs of movement across the frozen landscape. In the distance, barely visible in the pale Arctic light, you see them, a dark line stretching across the horizon. Thousands upon thousands of caribou beginning their ancient migration across the tundra of Beringia. For our Ice Age ancestors, these massive animal movements weren't just spectacular natural events. They were lifelines that provided food, clothing, and tools necessary for survival. Understanding and following these migrations was perhaps the most crucial survival skill our ancestors possessed, and it was knowledge that would guide them across a continent and into a new world. The megafauna of Ice Age. Beringia moved in patterns that dwarfed anything seen in the natural world today. Herds of woolly mammoths numbering in the thousands would migrate across hundreds of miles of tundra, following ancient routes that had been established over millennia. These massive animals, each weighing up to 8 tons, moved in coordinated groups that could stretch for dozens of miles, creating moving ecosystems that supported countless other species and provided opportunities for human hunters who possessed the knowledge to predict and intercept their movements. Caribou migrations were even more spectacular in their scale and regularity. Archaeological evidence and climate modeling suggest that Ice Age caribou herds may have numbered in the hundreds of thousands, moving in seasonal patterns that covered thousands of square miles. These animals followed routes determined by climate, vegetation, and predator pressure, creating predictable corridors of abundance that skilled human hunters could exploit for their survival. The giant steppe bison of Beringia also moved in massive herds that followed seasonal patterns related to grass availability and breeding cycles. These animals, significantly larger than modern buffalo, moved in groups that could number in the tens of thousands, creating temporary concentrations of resources that could sustain human populations for extended periods if hunters could successfully intercept and harvest from these herds. Understanding these migration patterns required knowledge that went far beyond simple animal tracking. Our ancestors had to understand the complex relationships between climate, vegetation, topography, and animal behavior that drove these massive movements. They needed to predict not just where animals would be at any given time, but when they would arrive, how long they would remain in an area, and which routes they would use to continue their journey. Seasonal timing was crucial for successful hunting of migratory animals. Different species moved at different times of year, following patterns related to breeding cycles, food availability, and weather conditions. Our ancestors developed sophisticated calendars that tracked these patterns with remarkable precision, allowing them to position themselves in optimal locations to intercept herds at the most favorable times for hunting. The routes used by migrating animals were determined by topographical features that channeled movement through specific corridors. River valleys, mountain passes, and coastal plains created natural highways that animals used generation after generation. Human hunters learned to identify these corridors and understand how seasonal changes in weather and vegetation affected the timing and intensity of animal movements through different areas. Archaeological evidence reveals that Ice Age peoples developed permanent and semi-permanent hunting camps positioned along major migration routes. These sites were carefully chosen to provide optimal hunting opportunities while offering adequate shelter and resources for extended occupations. Some of these hunting camps show evidence of use over hundreds or even thousands of years, suggesting that successful locations were known and utilized by many generations of hunters. The social organization required for Successful hunting of migratory herds was complex and sophisticated. Different groups had to coordinate their activities across vast territories to avoid interfering with each other's hunting efforts while maximizing the collective success of human populations. This coordination required communication systems, leadership structures, and sharing agreements that represented some of the most complex social arrangements in human history up to that point. Weather patterns played crucial roles in animal migration timing and success. Our ancestors learned to read atmospheric conditions not just for their own safety, but to predict how weather changes would affect animal behavior and movement patterns. A late spring might delay caribou migrations by weeks, while early snowfall could trigger premature movement of herds. Seeking better feeding conditions. The relationship between predators and prey also influenced migration patterns in ways that human hunters had to understand and exploit. Wolf packs, cave lions, and giant bears were also following the herds, creating complex predator-prey dynamics that affected where and when animals could be found. Human hunters learned to use these relationships to their advantage, sometimes driving animals toward natural predators or taking advantage of kills made by other predators. Plant phenology. The timing of plant growth and seasonal changes was crucial information for predicting animal movements. Our ancestors developed encyclopedic knowledge of how different plants responded to seasonal changes and how these changes affected the feeding patterns and movements of various animal species. They could predict animal locations based on the timing of grass growth, berry ripening, and other vegetation changes. The processing and preservation of meat from large-scale hunts required techniques that could handle enormous quantities of animal products in short periods of time. When a herd was successfully intercepted, hunters might have access to more meat than they could consume immediately, requiring rapid processing techniques that could preserve this bounty for future use. Archaeological evidence shows that Ice Age peoples developed industrial-scale meat processing techniques that could handle entire herds efficiently. Storage and catching systems were developed to take advantage of the seasonal abundance created by successful herd hunts. Underground caches, protected by permafrost, could preserve meat and other animal products for months or even years. These storage systems were often positioned along migration routes, creating supply networks that could support human travel and exploration across vast territories. The tools and weapons used for hunting migratory animals were specifically designed for the challenges of intercepting fast-moving herds. Spear throwers increased the range and accuracy of projectile weapons, allowing hunters to bring down animals from safer distances. Specialized hunting blinds and drive systems were constructed to channel animal movements and create opportunities for successful hunts without alerting entire herds to human presence. Knowledge transmission systems ensured that crucial information about animal migration patterns was passed down through generations. This knowledge was encoded in stories, songs, and ceremonies that made complex ecological information memorable and teachable. Young hunters learned not just hunting techniques, but the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human observation and experience with animal behavior. The timing of human migrations was often synchronized with animal movements, allowing human groups to follow abundant food sources across vast territories. This meant that human settlement patterns and population movements were closely tied to animal migration cycles, creating human migration patterns that paralleled and intersected with animal movements across the landscape. Regional variations in migration patterns meant that different areas of Beringia supported different hunting opportunities and strategies. Coastal areas might experience different migration timing than inland regions, while northern and southern areas of the land bridge supported different species and different seasonal patterns. Human groups had to understand these regional differences to successfully exploit resources across the diverse Landscapes of Beringia. The decline and eventual extinction of many Ice Age megafauna species at the end of the last glacial period fundamentally changed human survival strategies and migration patterns. As the massive herds of mammoths, giant bison, and other species disappeared, human populations had to adapt to new ecological conditions and develop new hunting strategies focused on smaller, more dispersed animal populations. Modern studies of contemporary animal migrations in Arctic regions provide insights into the patterns that our Ice Age ancestors would have observed and depended upon. Current caribou migrations in Alaska and northern Canada follow routes and timing patterns that may be similar to those used by Ice Age populations, offering clues about the ecological knowledge our ancestors possessed. The relationship between human populations and animal migrations was symbiotic rather than simply predatory. Human hunting activities could influence animal movement patterns, while animal migrations provided the resources and mobility patterns that allowed human populations to explore and colonize new territories. This interdependence was crucial for the successful human colonization of Beringia and the eventual movement of human populations into North America proper. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age fundamentally altered the migration patterns that had sustained human populations for thousands of years. As temperatures warmed and sea levels rose, the ecosystems that supported massive animal herds began to fragment and change. Human populations had to adapt quickly to these changing conditions, developing new survival strategies and migration patterns that would carry them into the modern era. The knowledge systems that our ancestors developed for understanding and exploiting animal migration patterns represent one of humanity's greatest achievements in ecological science. Without this knowledge, human populations could never have survived and thrived in the challenging conditions of Ice Age Beringia, and the successful colonization of the Americas would have been impossible. As we follow our ancestors across the landscapes of Beringia, we must remember that they weren't just surviving. They were mastering one of the most complex ecological systems on Earth, using their understanding of animal behavior and migration patterns to create sustainable human populations in an environment that challenged every aspect of their survival skills and cultural knowledge. Chapter 9. The crossing. You take the first step onto land that no human foot has ever touched. Behind you stretches the familiar territory of Beringia, with its known hunting grounds, established camps, and predictable seasonal patterns. Ahead lies in vast, uncharted wilderness, a continent larger than all of Europe and Asia combined, completely empty of human presence, filled with unknown dangers and untold opportunities. This is the moment when your ancestors crossed from the old world into the new, beginning one of the most significant journeys in human history. But this wasn't a single dramatic crossing. It was a gradual, generation-spanning process that would fundamentally change the course of human civilization. The transition from Beringia into what we now call North America proper wasn't marked by any obvious geographical boundary. The eastern edges of the Beringian landmass gradually gave way to the western regions of Alaska, creating a continuous landscape where human populations could expand gradually without realizing they were entering an entirely new continent. This gradual transition was crucial for human survival, as it allowed populations to adapt slowly to changing conditions rather than facing sudden, dramatic environmental shifts. Archaeological evidence suggests that the human movement from Beringia into North America occurred in multiple waves over thousands of years, rather than as a single migration event. Different groups moved eastward at different times, following various routes and facing different environmental conditions. Some may have moved along the Pacific coast, taking advantage of marine resources and milder coastal climates. Others may have followed inland routes through river valleys and mountain passes, pursuing the large game animals they had depended upon in Beringia. The Pacific coastal route presented unique opportunities and challenges for human populations. The coastline offered abundant marine resources, including seals, sea lions, fish, and shellfish that could supplement or replace the terrestrial hunting that had sustained populations in Beringia. However, coastal travel also required new technologies and skills, including boat construction, navigation techniques, and knowledge of marine ecosystems that differed significantly from the terrestrial environments human populations had previously mastered. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that some human populations may have developed sophisticated maritime technologies much earlier than previously thought. Evidence of early boat construction, fishing tools, and coastal settlements suggests that our ancestors were capable ocean travelers who could exploit marine resources effectively. This maritime capability would have been crucial for coastal migration routes that bypassed the massive ice sheets blocking overland routes into North America. The inland route through what is now Alaska and Western Canada presented different challenges and opportunities. This route required passage through landscapes still heavily influenced by the massive ice sheets that covered much of northern North America. Travelers would have encountered glacial valleys, ice-dammed lakes, and complex terrain that demanded sophisticated navigation and survival skills. However, this route also provided access to new hunting territories and resources that could support growing human populations. The timing of human movement into North America was closely linked to climate changes that were reshaping the entire northern hemisphere. As temperatures began to warm slightly during certain periods of the last glacial maximum, ice corridors opened and closed, creating windows of opportunity for human movement that might last only decades or centuries before conditions changed again. Understanding and exploiting these brief favorable periods was crucial for successful migration. The Mackenzie River corridor, running through what is now northwestern Canada, provided one of the most important routes for human movement into North America. This river system created a natural highway that could be followed for hundreds of miles into the heart of the continent. The river valleys provided shelter from harsh weather, access to fresh water, and corridors of vegetation that supported both game animals and human travelers. Archaeological evidence from early human sites in Alaska and northwestern Canada reveals the challenges faced by these pioneering populations. Tool technologies had to be adapted for new environments and new types of prey. Hunting strategies developed in Beringia had to be modified for different terrain and different animal species. Shelter construction techniques had to account for different climate patterns and available materials. The human groups that made these earliest journeys into North America were small, probably consisting of extended families or closely related clans numbering no more than a few dozen individuals. These small group sizes were both an advantage and a disadvantage for survival. Small groups could move quickly, make decisions efficiently, and exploit resources without overexploiting them. However, small groups were also vulnerable to accidents, diseases, or environmental disasters that could eliminate entire populations. The genetic evidence from modern Native American populations provides crucial insights into these early migration patterns. DNA analysis reveals that the founding populations of the Americas were relatively small and came from specific source populations in northeastern Asia. The genetic diversity patterns suggest that there may have been periods of population bottlenecks when small groups became isolated and then expanded rapidly when conditions improved. Psychological challenges of entering completely unknown territory cannot be underestimated. These early explorers had no maps, no guides, and no knowledge of what lay ahead. Every valley, every river crossing, every mountain pass was a step into the unknown that could lead to rich new hunting grounds or to deadly dead ends. The stress of constant uncertainty, combined with the physical challenges of travel in harsh conditions, would have tested every aspect of human endurance and adaptability. Communication systems became crucial as human groups spread across increasingly vast territories. Smoke signals, rock cairns, and other markers had to convey information about travel routes, resource locations, and dangers across distances that might take weeks to travel. These communication networks helped maintain connections between scattered groups and provided crucial information for survival and navigation. The discovery of new plant and animal resources required rapid learning and adaptation. Human populations entering North America encountered species they had never seen before, requiring quick decisions about which plants were edible, which animals were dangerous, and which resources could be exploited safely. This learning process was often dangerous, as mistakes in identifying poisonous plants or aggressive animals could have fatal consequences. Seasonal planning became even more complex as human groups moved into territories with unfamiliar climate patterns. The seasonal cycles that had governed survival in Beringia might not apply in new regions, requiring careful observation and adaptation to new patterns of temperature, precipitation, and resource availability. Groups had to learn new timing for travel, hunting, and food storage that matched the conditions they encountered. The social structures that had worked in Beringia had to evolve to meet the challenges of exploration and colonization. Leadership roles might shift to individuals with skills in navigation, resource identification, or risk assessment. Decision-making processes had to balance the need for quick responses to immediate dangers with careful planning for long-term survival in unknown territory. Archaeological evidence suggests that some early human groups in North America maintained contact with populations remaining in Beringia for extended periods. Trade goods, tool technologies, and genetic evidence indicate that the separation between Old World and New World populations was gradual rather than immediate. This continued contact provided crucial support networks for pioneering populations facing the challenges of colonizing a new continent at the speed of human expansion across North America. Once populations successfully entered the continent was remarkably rapid by archaeological standards. Evidence suggests that human populations reached the southern tip of South America within just a few thousand years of first entering North America, indicating migration rates that covered thousands of miles per generation. This rapid expansion required extraordinary adaptability and pioneering spirit. The environmental diversity encountered as human populations moved south and east across North America was unlike anything they had experienced in the relatively uniform landscapes of Beringia. Desert regions, tropical forests, mountain ranges, and coastal environments each presented unique challenges that required new survival strategies, technologies, and cultural adaptations. The extinction of many large animal species coincided with human arrival in different regions of North America, suggesting complex interactions between human hunting pressure and climate change effects. These extinctions forced human populations to adapt quickly to new ecological conditions and develop hunting strategies focused on smaller, more diverse animal populations. The archaeological record shows evidence of rapid technological innovation as human populations adapted to new environments across North America. Tool technologies, hunting strategies, and settlement patterns evolved quickly in response to new challenges and opportunities. This technological flexibility was crucial for successful colonization of such diverse environments. The linguistic diversity that developed among Native American populations provides evidence of the complexity and duration of the colonization process. The hundreds of distinct languages and language families found among Native American groups suggest long periods of isolation and independent cultural development following the initial colonization events. Modern climate modeling and archaeological evidence are still revealing new insights into the roots and timing of human entry into North America. Recent discoveries have pushed back the dates for human presence and revealed evidence of coastal migration routes that were previously unknown. These discoveries continue to refine our understanding of how and when our ancestors made this crucial transition. The legacy of this crossing extends far beyond the immediate survival of the human groups involved. The successful colonization of North America led to the development of countless distinct cultures, complex societies, and technological innovations that enriched human civilization. The courage and adaptability demonstrated by these early pioneers set the foundation for all subsequent human achievements. In the New World, as we stand today in Alaska or Siberia, looking across the waters that now separate these continents, it's difficult to imagine the vast grasslands and the small groups of humans who once walked freely between these now divided lands. But their footsteps across that vanished continent represent one of humanity's greatest achievements: the successful exploration and colonization of an entire new world through courage, ingenuity, and an unbreakable determination to survive and thrive in any environment our planet could offer. Chapter 10. Adapting to a new world, you've left behind everything familiar. The predictable seasonal patterns of Beringia, the known locations of toolstone deposits, the traditional hunting grounds where your ancestors had perfected their survival techniques over thousands of years. Now you find yourself in a landscape that changes dramatically with every mile you travel. Towering mountain ranges that dwarf anything you've seen before, dense forests where mammoth herds cannot survive, rushing rivers that require entirely new crossing techniques, and climates that shift from Arctic tundra to temperate woodlands within days of travel. Welcome to North America, a continent of extraordinary diversity that would test every adaptation skill our human ancestors possessed and force them to become the most environmentally flexible species on Earth. The environmental diversity of North America presented challenges that were completely unprecedented in human experience. Unlike the relatively uniform mammoth steppe of Beringia, this new continent contained dozens of distinct ecological zones, each with its own climate patterns, plant communities, animal species, and survival requirements. Human populations that had spent millennia perfecting their adaptation to one specific environment suddenly found themselves needing to master entirely new ecosystems with each generation of expansion. The mountain ranges of Western North America created some of the most dramatic environmental transitions early human populations had ever encountered. The Rocky Mountains, stretching from Alaska to Mexico, created barriers that required new travel strategies and survival techniques. High-altitude environments presented challenges of thin air, extreme temperature variations, and weather patterns that could change from pleasant to deadly within hours. Early human groups had to learn new techniques for mountain travel, high-altitude survival, and navigation through complex terrain. The forest ecosystems of North America required fundamental changes in human hunting and survival strategies. The dense woodlands of the Pacific Northwest, the Great Lakes region, and the eastern seaboard supported very different animal communities than the open grasslands of Beringia. Instead of massive herds of large herbivores, these forests contained solitary or small group animals like deer, elk, bears, and smaller mammals that required entirely different hunting techniques and weapon systems. Forest environments also presented new challenges for shelter construction and group mobility. The dense vegetation that provided excellent building materials also made travel difficult and limited visibility for navigation and hunting. Human groups had to develop new techniques for moving through dense undergrowth, constructing shelters using wooden frameworks instead of bone structures, and finding their way in landscapes where landmarks might be obscured by vegetation. The river systems of North America created both opportunities and obstacles for human populations. Major rivers like the Columbia, Colorado, Mississippi, and Missouri provided highways for travel and rich ecosystems that supported diverse plant and animal communities. However, these rivers also created barriers that required new technologies and techniques for safe crossing. The development of sophisticated watercraft became crucial for human survival and expansion across a continent crossed by countless waterways. Seasonal patterns in North America varied dramatically from region to region, requiring human populations to develop flexible strategies that could adapt to different climate cycles. The relatively predictable seasonal patterns of Beringia gave way to complex regional variations in temperature, precipitation, and resource availability. Some areas experienced long, harsh winters but brief, intense summers. Others had moderate seasonal variations, but unpredictable weather patterns that could bring sudden storms or droughts. The plant communities of North America included thousands of species that were completely unknown to human populations coming from Beringia. Learning which plants were edible, which were poisonous, which could be used for medicines, and which provided materials for tools and construction required generations of careful observation and experimentation. This botanical learning process was often dangerous, as mistakes in plant identification could have fatal consequences for entire groups. Desert environments in southwestern North America presented survival challenges that were the complete opposite of the Arctic conditions human populations had mastered in Beringia. Instead of extreme cold, these environments featured extreme heat and aridity that required new techniques for water conservation, shelter construction, and food procurement. Human groups entering desert regions had to learn entirely new survival strategies while carrying forward the cultural knowledge that had sustained them in completely different environments taught the animal species of North America, included many that were unknown to human populations from Beringia, requiring rapid learning of new hunting techniques and animal behavior patterns. Giant ground sloths, short-faced bears, American cheetahs, and numerous other species required different hunting strategies than the familiar mammoths and bison of the northern grasslands. Some of these animals were more dangerous than anything humans had encountered before, while others were more elusive and required sophisticated tracking and hunting techniques. Coastal environments presented opportunities for human populations to exploit entirely new categories of resources. Marine ecosystems along the Pacific and Atlantic coasts contained fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and seaweeds that could support human populations in ways that were impossible in the interior grasslands of Beringia. However, exploiting these marine resources required new technologies including boats, fishing equipment, and techniques for processing and preserving seafood. The geological diversity of North America created new opportunities and challenges for toolmaking and construction. Different regions contained different types of stone suitable for tool construction, requiring human populations to learn the properties of new materials and develop new techniques for stone working. Some regions lacked high-quality tool stone entirely, forcing human groups to develop trade networks or alternative technologies using bone, wood, and other materials. Weather patterns in North America included extreme events that were rare or unknown in Beringia. Tornadoes, hurricanes, flash floods, and severe thunderstorms required new survival strategies and shelter designs. Human populations had to learn to recognize the signs of these dangerous weather events and develop appropriate responses that could save lives when extreme conditions struck with little warning. The elevation changes across North America created complex environmental gradients that required human populations to adapt to multiple ecological zones within relatively small geographic areas. A group traveling from sea level to high mountain areas might encounter several distinct plant communities climate zones, and animal populations within a few days of travel. This environmental complexity required exceptional flexibility and learning ability. Regional climate variations meant that survival strategies that worked in one area might be completely inappropriate just a few hundred miles away. Human populations had to develop cultural systems that could maintain core survival knowledge while remaining flexible enough to adapt to new environmental conditions. This required sophisticated knowledge transmission, systems that could preserve essential information while encouraging innovation and adaptation. The timing of resource availability varied dramatically across different regions of North America, requiring human populations to develop new seasonal scheduling strategies. Plants that provided crucial resources might be available at different times of year in different regions, while animal migration patterns followed routes and timing that were completely different from those in Beringia. Human groups had to learn new seasonal calendars and resource scheduling strategies for each new region. They entered. Competition with other predators became more complex in North America's diverse ecosystems. Instead of the relatively predictable predator communities of Beringia, human populations encountered different predator species in each new environment. Cave bears, short-faced bears, American lions, and direwolves all required different avoidance and defense strategies, while competition for prey species was more complex in ecosystems with greater predator diversity. The development of regional tool technologies reflected adaptation to local environmental conditions and available materials. Archaeological evidence shows that human populations quickly developed specialized toolkits adapted to local resources and challenges. Coastal populations developed sophisticated fishing and marine hunting equipment, while forest populations created specialized woodworking tools and woodland hunting equipment. Disease environments in North America may have presented new challenges for human populations with no previous exposure to local pathogens. Different regions contain different disease organisms that could affect human health, requiring populations to develop new medicinal knowledge and health management strategies. The relative isolation of small pioneering groups may have made them particularly vulnerable to new disease challenges. The psychological adaptation to environmental diversity was as important as the physical and technological adaptations. Human populations had to maintain confidence and problem-solving ability while constantly encountering new and unfamiliar challenges. The stress of constant adaptation to new environments required strong social support systems and flexible cultural frameworks that could provide stability while encouraging innovation. Modern environmental science has revealed the incredible complexity of North American ecosystems and the remarkable achievement represented by successful human adaptation to this diversity. The environmental knowledge that early human populations developed through trial and error, observation, and cultural transmission represents one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. This knowledge formed the foundation for the rich diversity of Native American cultures that developed across the continent. The speed of human environmental adaptation in North America was remarkable by any historical standard. Archaeological evidence suggests that human populations successfully adapted to most of North America's major ecological zones within just a few thousand years of first entering the continent. This rapid adaptation required extraordinary learning ability, cultural flexibility, and cooperative social systems that could share and preserve crucial survival knowledge. As we trace the paths of our ancestors across this incredibly diverse continent, we must remember that each new valley, each new climate zone, and each new ecosystem they encountered represented a survival challenge that tested every aspect of their intelligence, adaptability, and determination. Their success in mastering this environmental diversity laid the foundation for the rich tapestry of human cultures that would flourish across North America for thousands of years to come. Chapter 11. Impact on human evolution. Standing at the edge of modern civilization, surrounded by skyscrapers, smartphones, and space satellites, it's difficult to imagine that everything around you, every technological innovation, every cultural achievement, every aspect of human society can trace its roots back to a small group of Ice Age survivors who learned to cross frozen tundras with nothing but their intelligence, determination, and carefully sewn animal skins. The crossing of Beringia wasn't just a geographic migration. It was an evolutionary crucible that forged the human characteristics we recognize today and set the stage for our species' eventual dominance of the planet. This is the story of how surviving the Ice Age didn't just change where humans lived, it changed what humans were taught. The cognitive demands of Ice Age survival created evolutionary pressures that favored intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving ability to an unprecedented degree. Surviving in the harsh conditions of Beringia and the early Americas required the ability to learn quickly, adapt to new situations, and solve complex problems with limited resources. These cognitive challenges may have been the final evolutionary push that created the modern human brain, with its extraordinary capacity for abstract thinking, planning, and innovation. The social cooperation required for Ice Age survival fostered the development of sophisticated communication systems that became the foundation for all human language and culture. Coordinating mammoth hunts, sharing crucial survival information, and maintaining group cohesion during extended periods of stress required communication abilities far more complex than any previous human populations had needed. These communication demands drove the evolution of language skills that allowed humans to share knowledge, plan complex activities, and maintain cultural traditions across generations. Technological innovations developed during the Ice Age, crossing from needle-based clothing systems to sophisticated hunting strategies to architectural techniques using organic materials, established the foundation for all subsequent human technology. The problem-solving approaches, the understanding of material science, and the systematic development and transmission of technical knowledge that characterized Ice Age cultures provided the intellectual framework that would eventually lead to agriculture, metallurgy, and the complex technologies of modern civilization. The genetic bottlenecks experienced by small human populations during the Ice Age crossing had profound effects on human genetic diversity and evolution. The founding populations of the Americas were genetically limited, and this genetic constraint may have influenced the subsequent development of human physical and cognitive characteristics. At the same time, the extreme survival challenges faced by these populations may have created strong selection pressures that favored certain genetic variants associated with intelligence, physical endurance, and stress tolerance. The dietary adaptations required for Ice Age survival had lasting effects on human physiology and metabolism. Learning to thrive on high-fat, high-protein diets dominated by large game animals required metabolic adaptations that influenced human nutritional requirements and digestive capabilities. These dietary adaptations may have contributed to the development of larger human brains, which require enormous amounts of energy and specific nutrients that were abundant in Ice Age hunting cultures. The psychological resilience developed by Ice Age human populations became one of humanity's most important survival characteristics. Learning to maintain morale, group cohesion, and problem-solving ability under extreme stress created psychological capabilities that have served human populations throughout history. The mental toughness developed during the Ice Age crossing provided the foundation for humanity's ability to survive and thrive in virtually any environment on Earth. The cultural innovations developed during Ice Age survival became the prototypes for all subsequent human cultural systems. The knowledge transmission methods, social organization strategies, and resource management techniques developed by Ice Age populations provided the organizational frameworks that would eventually support complex civilizations. The cultural evolution that occurred during the Ice Age crossing was as important as biological evolution in creating modern human capabilities. The environmental awareness and ecological knowledge developed by Ice Age populations established humans as the most environmentally adaptable species on the planet. Learning to read weather patterns, understand animal behavior, predict seasonal changes, and exploit resources efficiently across diverse ecosystems created environmental knowledge systems that allowed humans to colonize virtually every habitat on Earth. This ecological expertise became one of humanity's most distinctive characteristics. The artistic and symbolic capabilities that emerged during Ice Age cultures represent the beginning of human creative expression and abstract thinking. Cave paintings, carved tools, decorated clothing, and other artistic artifacts from Ice Age sites show that these populations had developed the capacity for symbolic thought and creative expression that distinguishes modern humans from all other species. These artistic capabilities were not just decorative, but served crucial functions in knowledge transmission and social cohesion. The risk assessment and decision-making skills developed during Ice Age survival became fundamental human cognitive capabilities. Learning to evaluate complex, uncertain situations and make life or death decisions with limited information under extreme time pressure created decision-making abilities that have served human populations in countless challenging situations throughout history. These cognitive skills became essential components of human intelligence and problem-solving ability. The physical adaptations that occurred during Ice Age survival may have contributed to distinctive human physical characteristics. The extreme conditions of the Ice Age may have selected for certain body proportions, metabolic capabilities, and physiological features that characterize modern humans. These physical adaptations complemented the cognitive and cultural changes that were occurring simultaneously. The toolmaking innovations of Ice Age populations established the technological foundation for all subsequent human material culture. The systematic approach to tool design, the understanding of material properties, and the development of specialized tools for specific functions that characterized Ice Age technologies provided the conceptual framework for all later technological development. The principles of engineering and design that emerged during this period remained fundamental to human technology throughout subsequent history. The population genetics of Ice Age crossing had lasting effects on human genetic diversity and evolution. The small founding populations that crossed Beringia and colonized the Americas experienced genetic bottlenecks and founder effects that influenced human genetic variation. These genetic effects contributed to both the unity and diversity of human populations and may have influenced the subsequent evolution of human physical and cognitive characteristics. The social innovations developed during Ice Age survival became the foundation for all subsequent human social systems. The leadership structures, conflict resolution mechanisms, resource sharing systems, and group decision-making processes developed by Ice Age populations provided the organizational templates that would eventually support complex societies and civilizations. These social innovations were as important as technological innovations in enabling human success. The educational systems that emerged during Ice Age cultures established the framework for all subsequent human knowledge transmission. The methods for teaching crucial survival skills, preserving cultural knowledge, and preparing young people for adult responsibilities that were developed by Ice Age populations became the foundation for all later educational and cultural systems. These knowledge transmission capabilities were crucial for maintaining and developing human cultural achievements. The medical and health knowledge developed during Ice Age survival became the foundation for all subsequent human medical understanding. Learning to maintain health under extreme conditions, treat injuries and illnesses with limited resources, and understand the relationship between nutrition and health created medical knowledge systems that provided the foundation for later developments in human health and medicine. The psychological understanding of human motivation, group dynamics, and individual behavior that emerged from Ice Age survival experiences became fundamental components of human social intelligence. Learning to manage group conflicts, maintain motivation under extreme stress, and understand individual psychological needs created insights into human psychology that became essential components of human social capabilities. The innovations in food production, processing, and preservation that characterized Ice Age cultures became the foundation for all subsequent human food systems. The techniques for hunting, processing, and preserving food that were developed during Ice Age survival provided the technological and conceptual foundation that would eventually lead to agriculture and the complex food production systems that support modern civilization. Modern genetic research has revealed that the human populations that survived the Ice Age crossing carry genetic markers that can be traced in contemporary human populations around the world. The genetic legacy of Ice Age survival is still present in modern human DNA, providing direct connections between contemporary humans and their Ice Age ancestors. This genetic continuity demonstrates the profound impact that Ice Age survival had on human evolution and development. The climate adaptation strategies developed during Ice Age survival became templates for human responses to environmental challenges throughout history. The approaches to dealing with climate variation, resource scarcity, and environmental unpredictability that were developed during the Ice Age crossing have been applied by human populations facing environmental challenges in every subsequent historical period. These adaptation strategies became fundamental components of human survival capabilities, the exploration and colonization capabilities that emerged during the Ice Age crossing established humans as the most geographically widespread species on the planet. The techniques for exploration, navigation, and colonization of new territories that were developed during the Beringia crossing provided the foundation for all subsequent human geographical expansion. These exploration capabilities eventually allowed humans to colonize virtually every environment on Earth and even begin exploring space. As we look back across the thousands of years that separate us from our Ice Age ancestors, we can see that their extraordinary journey across the frozen tundras of Beringia did more than just populate a new continent. It created the modern human species in all its complexity, ingenuity, and adaptability. Every challenge they faced, every problem they solved, and every innovation they developed contributed to the remarkable capabilities that characterize humanity today. Their legacy lives on not just in the DNA we carry, but in the intelligence, creativity, and determination that continue to drive human achievement and exploration into new frontiers that they could never have imagined. As we stand today on the shores of Alaska, gazing out across the Bering Strait at the distant coast of Siberia, we're looking at more than just water separating two continents. Beneath those dark waves lies the lost world of Beringia, the continent-sized land bridge that our ancestors crossed in one of the most remarkable journeys in human history. But more than that, we're looking at the birthplace of the modern human spirit, the crucible where our species developed the intelligence, adaptability, and determination that would eventually carry us to every corner of the Earth and beyond. The story of how early humans crossed the frozen tundras is ultimately a story about us, about the extraordinary capabilities that lie dormant within every human being until circumstances demand their emergence. Our Ice Age ancestors weren't superhuman. They were people just like us, with the same hopes, fears, and limitations we face today. What made them extraordinary was their refusal to accept that any environment was too harsh, any challenge too great, or any distance too far to overcome. They transformed a simple pointed bone with a hole in one end into a revolutionary technology that opened entire continents for human habitation. They learned to read the subtle language of wind and ice with a precision that rivals our most sophisticated weather prediction systems. They developed hunting strategies so effective they could bring down animals that weighed more than modern trucks. They created architectural systems that could withstand the worst weather our planet could produce, using nothing but the bones and hides of the animals they hunted. But perhaps most remarkably, they maintained their humanity throughout this incredible journey. They created art, told stories, cared for their children, and preserved the knowledge that would benefit generations yet unborn. They didn't just survive the Ice Age, they emerged from it stronger, smarter, and more capable than any human populations that had come before them. Their legacy surrounds us today in ways both obvious and subtle. Every technological innovation, every act of exploration, every moment when humans choose to adapt rather than surrender can trace its roots back to those small groups of people who decided that frozen tundras were not barriers but pathways to new possibilities. The challenges we face today, climate change, resource scarcity, technological disruption, social upheaval, are no less daunting than those faced by our Ice Age ancestors. But their story reminds us that humans have an almost unlimited capacity for adaptation, innovation, and cooperation when survival demands it. They crossed the frozen tundras with nothing but their intelligence and determination. What challenges are we capable of overcoming with all the tools and knowledge at our disposal? The ice has melted, the tundras have changed, and the world our ancestors knew has vanished beneath the waves. But their greatest creation, the modern human spirit, lives on in each of us, ready to carry us across whatever frozen tundras we may face in the future. Their journey continues in ours,